everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we're doing my 2025 reading in review, talking about stats, themes, did I actually read my top 5 TBR, really checking in on how did I do and what actually happened in my reading life in 2025. First up, in 2025, I am back to my usual reading amount. I read 85 books. I usually assume that I am going to read somewhere in the 80 to 90 books range. I have read less and more in other years, and 80 to 90 seems like my kind of comfortable range for me. But the year before, in 2024, I think I read like 47 books, which is nothing to sneeze at, but is way lower than I normally read. And so this year I am happy to be back right in the center of my comfortable range at 85 books. My average star rating for the year was 3.7 stars, which is a little bit lower than last year. Last year it was 4 stars. I read a total of 18,967 pages, and those are only counting the books I physically read. It is not counting like the page counts of audiobooks. I spent 310 hours physically reading across 48 books plus some DNFs. So the way I was tracking this, I didn't separate out the time spent on books that were DNF'd from books that I completed. So those 310 hours is not only the 48 books that I finished physically, but also is including if I spent like time reading the first 20% of a book and then DNF'd it, those hours still went into that total. But that means I spent approximately 6.5 hours per book, although it was probably less than that because of those DNFs, so it was probably closer to like 6 hours per book. I also listened to 323.75 hours across 35 audiobooks this year, and that averages out to about 9 hours and like 20 minutes per audiobook. However, that does not necessarily exactly depict how much time I actually spent on each audiobook, because that 323.75 hours is based on like the actual time of each audiobook, and I tend to listen to audiobooks sped up. This year I actually increased my listening speed a little bit. For a long time I have been a solid like 1.5 listening speed person. This year I went up in most cases to 1.7, and in some cases 2 times speed, depending on how easy the book was to follow and how slow the narrator was. So if I kind of take the 323.75 and assumed that I was listening to books at an average of like 1.7, then I probably spent closer to actually like 190 minutes listening to audiobooks across 35 books, which would be about 5.5 or like 5.5 hours per book, which also makes sense because a lot of the audiobooks I was listening to were part of the Penric and Desdemona series, which are pretty much all novellas, and so those are pretty quick reads. Of course, as always, my most read genre is fantasy, which 58 of the 85 books that I read were fantasy. Also, this year I read quite a few 2025 releases. That's something that I have wanted to do in previous years because I would pre-order books and be really excited about them, but not always get to them in the same year that I bought them. But this year, 25 of the books that I read this year were 2025 releases, and for me that is quite a lot. That's quite a big chunk of my reading. That would be at least over a quarter of my reading. But speaking of a percentage of my reading, 20 of the books that I read in 2025 were rereads, which is about a quarter of my reading as well, which I'm pretty happy with because I think that that is a larger percentage than the previous year, and I love rereading. I feel like I don't reread enough. I used to reread constantly, and then like many people, I start making bookish content online, and you know, there's just so many new books to read and new things to talk about that I don't always reread. So I feel pretty good about like a quarter of my reading for the year was rereads, and that feels like a lot. But one of my big themes for the year was that I read a lot from my physical TBR. I read from my shelf a lot this year, which I am really happy about. I like to actually be reading the books that I have, and a lot of that is really because I was doing my TBR clear out project. I've talked about this quite a lot this year, but it was a big part of my reading for the year, and I did kind of 2 rounds of it. I did the first round in the first half of the year, taking the 10 oldest books off my physical TBR and just making sure I got to those. I had quite a few DNFs from this project and only finished reading a few of the books, but ultimately still a success because I made decisions about those books, and that's really what I wanted. And then I did a round 2 in the second half of the year, and similarly, like, I think I completed slightly more books, but still had quite a few DNFs in the second half of the year as well. But that really helped me to make sure I was getting to things off of my shelf. And even so, even without that, I was also just picking books off of my shelf throughout the year, which I am really happy about. So in terms of my TBR library, which I am, to make the distinction, my TBR library are the books that I start the year with, and those are the ones that I'm trying to really make sure I get to. And then my TBR that I acquire during the year are the books that I bought throughout 2025. So TBR library, the books I started the year with, I started with 47 books on my physical TBR, which actually is down quite a bit. I feel like I have had a large TBR for quite a while, and 47 is not that large for me, but that's a good size to me. I like 47. But from the TBR library, I read 13 books. I had 16 DNFs and 7 unhauls, so books that I didn't even try to read in DNF. I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to read this ever. So in total, I have 36 books off of my TBR, which is including all read DNF and unhaul books, which means only 11 books from that TBR library is continuing to stay on my TBR. And I happen to know, because I've been tracking my books by what year I read them and then doing this clear out project based on year, those 11 books are from 2023 and 2024. So they've been on my shelf a couple years, but not like an egregious amount of time. And those 11 books have now become my TBR clear out project for 2026. So those will also hopefully be cleared out this year. For my 2025 acquired TBR, so the books that I bought in 2025, I actually bought exactly 50 fiction books in 2025. So I'm not counting, like, I bought some books like about needle felting and stuff like that. I'm not counting those because I'm never gonna like read those cover to cover. Those are reference books to like teach me how to do things. But 50 fiction books, and I read 32 of them, which is about 64% of the books that I bought. I actually read them in the same year, which I feel pretty good about. For me, that is a lot. I only had 1 DNF from all of the books that I bought in 2025. Only 1 of them was a DNF, and that is wild to me. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a prolific DNFer. I DNF at the drop of a hat. I mean, that's not true. I do give things a chance. I try to get a little ways in before I DNF, but still, I will DNF things. And so the fact that only 1 of the books was a DNF is kind of crazy to me, and I feel very good about either my ability to pick books or my perseverance. But I think that a lot of why that is also due to that I was trying to be really selective about my pre-orders and really focusing on buying books that I like they're from authors that I knew. I had plans to read them. They were continuations of series, things like that, that felt like a more sure bet. And that's not to say that I didn't try new authors, but I had like a lot of reasons why things felt like they would be a pretty sure bet for me. So I feel like I did really well in 2025. Another theme in my reading, which is related to one of the goals that I had for the year, is that I binged a lot of series. And that had been one of my goals because I wanted to actually finish the series I was reading and also have the continuity in my reading to actually remember what's going on in a series instead of reading the first book and then like 3 years maybe continuing the series when I've forgotten everything and lost interest. So I did binge some series this year. Of the books that I read, 18 of the fiction books that I read were standalones, and 60 of the books that I read were a part of a series, whether that is a first book in a series or a continuation of a series. 60 of the 85 that I read were some part of a series, and that is across 28 different series that I read from. I read 18 first books in series. Not all of those series are ones that I am going to be continuing, but 18 of the books that I read were first books in a series. 7 of those series are ones that I do plan to finish and are now on my like series TBR. And there are 8 series that I finished in 2025. Some of those are series that I had started previous years and I finished them this year, but a lot of them were also ones that I had started and finished in the same year. But the 8 series that I finished this year are The Enchanted Forest Chronicles. This was a reread for me. I read the first 2 in December of 2024 and just finished my reread of the second 2 in January of 2025. Those were like the first things that I read in the year. So Enchanted Forest Chronicles, the Beast Player duology. I finally finished the second book, which is The Beast Warrior. The Nightshine duology, I read Moon Dark Smile, which is the final book in that duology. And then I had 5 series that I started and finished this year, which were Tower of Winds by Makia Lucier, the Elemental Blessing series by SHINN, the Little Thieves series by Margaret Owen, the 12 Houses series by SHINN, and the Hollow and the Haunted duology by Camilla Rains. Speaking of SHINN though, you may have noticed 2 of those series were SHINN. This was truly like my year of SHINN. I read 2 complete series from her, which included 11 books, and that makes her one of my top 2 most read authors this year. It was SHINN and Lois McMaster Bujold because I was doing my chronological reread of the Penric and Desdemona series, but reading SHINN was like a huge theme for me this year, especially because the way I was doing it is that for most of the year I was reading at least 1 or 2 SHINN books per month. So it was just like a consistent part of my reading year. And I already have a video that I will link in the description if you're interested in more of like detailed thoughts about my experience reading SHINN. I have a kind of overview and tier ranking of all of the SHINN books that I have read. But in addition to SHINN, I read 24 new to me authors. I guess SHINN wasn't really a new to me author because technically I read Somerset Castle Auburn a couple years ago, but this was the year that I really like dove into her work. But anyways, this year, 24 new to me authors, which is very exciting. The previous year, only 9 new to me authors. And then my final like theme for the year was this was also a big year for YA for me, which is really exciting because that was a thing that I really wanted more YA in 2025. I don't think I actually like said this anywhere. I don't know. I don't think it was part of my goals or anything, but it was something that I had been thinking about at the beginning of the year, was that I wanted to read more YA. YA is something that before joining BookTube, I read almost no YA other than like Tamara Pierce's books. And then when I joined, YA was like the big thing. It was the huge trend in publishing and everybody was reading and talking about YA. And so I read so much YA right off the bat when I joined BookTube like years ago. And in that process, I read a lot of great stuff because I was kind of reading like the cream of the crop all at once. And that's when I read some stuff like The Raven Cycle and Six of Crows and stuff like that. But once I got through that stuff, and then I kind of got to a point where I had to like kind of find YA myself more. I really struggled for a couple years to like find YA that I liked, and I just wasn't really enjoying it. And so I really stopped reading very much YA at all and was really focusing just on adult fantasy, which adult fantasy is kind of, you know, that's my thing, you know, that's what I've been reading most of my life. But then towards the end of 2024, I was feeling like I wanted to get back into YA, and I think I had started to feel a little bogged down by all of the like adult fantasy that I had been reading. As much as I love it, it does tend to be a little bit denser and slower, and sometimes you just want to mix it up. Anyways, so that was one of the things that I wanted to do in 2025, was to read more YA, but really it was like to find YA that I really enjoyed because I had struggled to do that before. This year, I feel like I did such a good job, and I don't know what I did, so I can't replicate it, and that is going to be a problem. But I had so much YA that I read this year. So I read 24 YA books in 2025, and a lot of those were from authors that I had not read before. There were a few from like some tried and true authors. I'm sure that's probably counting my reread of the Heartstopper graphic novels. It also includes like The Corruption of Hollis Brown by Kay Ankrum and Hazelthorn by C.G. Drews. So those are all YA authors that I've read before. I know that I like them. They're tried and true. But I also had some new to me YA authors that were a real gamble for me, and it turned out really well, and I read multiple books from them. So some of those are like Makia Lucier, one of my big discoveries for the year. I started out the year, like one of the first things I read was Year of the Reaper, and I loved it. And then I just went on to read all of her fantasy. I think she has one historical fiction book that I haven't read. Also discovered Margaret Owen, and I read the whole Little Thieves series, which was so fun, and I love her characters, and I definitely want to read more from her. I think she has at least one other series. And then I also read The Hollow and the Haunted duology by Camilla Rains. So only 2 books from her in one series, but I don't think she has any other books actually. But those were also super fun, and I would definitely read more from her if she publishes more. And then another YA author that I discovered this year, and I only read one because it was right at the end of the year, but Emily Lloyd Jones wrote The Wild Huntress, which was the last book that I read in 2025. And like, I had some like critiques of it, but overall really enjoyed it. Would definitely read more from her. I think she has at least 2 other books that are not like part of a series, but they're set in the same world, so I'm definitely planning to check those out. So that is 4 new to me YA authors that were huge successes for me, and that is so fun and exciting for me. And as I said, I have no idea how I picked them and why this was successful. I'm really glad that it worked, but I'm gonna continue to try more YA in 2025. If you have any recommendations for me for other YA books to read based on some of these ones that I've mentioned, please let me know. YA that you think has really good writing, great characters, like, please let me know. I'm looking for more YA. And then finally, did I read my top 5 TBR for 2025. So in addition to my TBR Clear Out Project TBRs, I also had my top 5, which were Le Fay by Sophie Keach, The Shadowed Land by Signe Pike, Any Human Power by Manda Scott, The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, and The Girl Who Chased the Moon by Sarah Addison Allen. So of these, I read 3 of them. I DNF'd one and I didn't get to one of them. However, that was an intentional choice that I will tell you about. So the one that I didn't get to was Le Fay by Sophie Keach. And originally I had been thinking, for some reason I thought that the 3rd book in that trilogy was coming out in 2025. And so I was like, oh, I'll read the 2nd book and then be ready for the 3rd book to come out. Turns out 3rd book is actually coming out in 2026. And so I decided to just hold off on reading book 2 so that then in 2026 I can reread book 1 and then read books 2 and 3 for the first time. So I put that one off on purpose. My DNF was Any Human Power by Manda Scott. And then the 3 books that I did read were The Shadowed Land by Signe Pike, which is the 3rd book in the Lost Queen series. There is going to be a 4th book, so I don't think this is the conclusion. I also did read The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, which I thought was really good. It's a very like emotionally taxing book to read. And as much as I think it was well written, I don't know if I was emotionally invested enough in the characters to go through the kind of emotional hardship of reading that book. However, I have heard that the series gets better as it goes on. Not that it's not good, but people say it gets even better and you get much more invested in the characters. So I might give the next book a try. And then lastly, I did also read The Girl Who Chased the Moon by Sarah Addison Allen, which was a pretty, like, it was okay. You know, not my favorite from her. I really enjoy Sarah Addison Allen's books in general. I've loved a lot of her stuff. This one wasn't the strongest in my opinion. So that is my 2025 reading in review. If you track any stats for your reading year, please let me know what is your reading stat for the year that you are the most proud of, or you just think is like the most fun thing to know. And if you don't track reading stats, what is just like a theme that you noticed in your reading for the year? I love to hear a theme in people's reading. It's so fun when you're just like in it and you're reading all these books, and at the end of the year you can kind of look back and go like, wow, I had a real like pattern that takes shape over the course of the year. So please let me know either a favorite stat or a theme from your reading for 2025. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.